Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Now, I wanted to talk about Suicide Squad and why I think it could have been so much better. Now, do I think the game is bad or the worst thing ever? No. I am actually surprisingly at 50-50 on the game, and honestly surprisingly split with my history playing the Arkham games and all that. This game was surprisingly mixed for me. I know a lot of people hate this game, despise it, and it's understandable for some of the reasons with the Arkham series and it just basically doing a lot of stuff that's different. But for me, I honestly am surprised on how interesting and surprisingly good some elements were with the game. Now, am I going to halt my opinions on the fact of a lot of things with the game, with Brainiac being the main villain, and the basically, like the title suggests, kill the Justice League? There are a lot of elements I think were wasted or could have been done so much better. And I honestly might do a rewrite video in the future because I've talked about it live on stream and I've talked about it in the past. I do think there's a lot of elements I think that could have been done better with this game, and I honestly can wholeheartedly agree with a lot of different takes. But I don't think this game is completely terrible or bad or stuff like that. Now, do I think that it does a disservice in some regards with Kevin Conroy? I'm 50-50 on. I do think it does, but I also think that there's some elements that actually work that you have to read between the lines. With characters like the Flash and Green Lantern being their first appearance in the Arkham series, and they do get some moments to shine where Flash starts out as like he rescues you, he saves you from total death by Green Lantern of all characters, and all the characters do get their moments to shine. Even if they're mind controlled by Brainiac, there are slight moments where I think the game feels more like comic-y, where like the storytelling flops in certain senses, and I do see some elements of why a lot of people don't vibe with the storytelling or stuff like that. Believe me, I've seen my fair share of videos that are just straight up hating this game, like Salvage, Dreamcast Guy, all that, but it doesn't shy away from the epic moments as well when Batman shows up and kicks our asses. That was one of the many highlights of this game, where you really truly get to have some senses with the bosses. Now, are all the bosses great? 50-50 on a lot of things. Do I think they could have been done better? Do I like the gameplay? I'm 50-50 on. Characters like Deadshot and Harley Quinn, I guess the gameplay slightly works for. I'm 50-50 on. Characters like King Shark, Captain Boomerang, I am not a fan of the looter-shooter elements. I am not going to defend Rocksteady's decision to make this game a looter-shooter. I don't like it, never will like it. Do I think the idea of having it be a live service game is a great idea? Kinda. I don't mind the game being a live service. My problem is the fact that it doesn't have to be looter-shooter to be live service. And honestly, games like Rocket League and a few others have proven that in the past. Now, let's be real with ourselves. Do I think this game is terrible? If we're going to go in a review route, no. Do I think it is great? No. But I do think it had a lot of potential to be great, but it was slightly squandered. And I honestly would love to do a rewrite video for this game because the premise itself is a genius premise. But it also, where I think the game flounders is its execution. Now, if you actually read between the lines of like certain elements of the story, which gets lost in certain bits. There are elements where you truly get a sense of each of the characters, and you do have to read between the lines to find that balance. Characters like Batman showing up, I do feel some elements of how he was brought back were a little bit stupid. I'm going to totally agree with a lot of people's takes, like Salvage and other stuff. I think the game itself is a good game. My problems with it are with the storytelling. The gameplay itself is fine. I don't like that it's a shooter completely, or a looter shooter, but I don't want to squander the fact that it's not bad. It's a great game overall. Gameplay wise, it's solid. Some characters' traversals feel completely different from one another. To go into depth, Harley Quinn is more floaty and acrobatic, jumping from her drone, which does have a little bit of a cooldown, just like every character's traversal does. Basically, Deadshot has the jetpack, which is, at a short bursts, where you can technically fly, but, Captain Boomerang is more teleporty, but a mixture of speedy, and King Shark is more just jumping around. Kind of feels a little bit like the Hulk. A little bit clunky, but still good. But thoughts aside, do I think if this game wasn't a shooter, it could have been done better? Probably. But I also don't want to discount the fact that Rocksteady is a hardworking team. Do I think some elements of the story suffer from, doing certain characters a disservice or stuff like that? It's in between, because I do like certain elements. In my respect to Kevin Conroy, he's been playing Batman in this universe for years. Arkham Knight was supposed to be the finale for his character, but in some aspects, it also wasn't. For him to be turned evil and become what he always feared does feel like what the Arkham Knight was technically leading up to anyways. Basically a version of Tower of Babel where Wonder Woman is the last person standing, not Batman. And it's basically, this universe has almost become like the dark multiverse, like a dark multiverse version of itself. And I did see a comment in one of my streams, which I honestly thought it was a very lazy form of storytelling. It just, this whole game takes place in Brainiac's head. I feel that's lazy, and that's not how we solve it. If I'm being honest, the gameplay, the story, how I would tweak gameplay if it was me to rewrite the game and make it, I would honestly do a lot of things differently, but I might save that for another video. The wasted potential for me comes from the storytelling and a lot of certain elements. Where the game shines is in character. The idea of the Justice League becoming the bad guys, or just the characters that you know and love becoming evil, isn't something new. But I also think it's something that we've seen a lot more of lately with shows like The Boys and other stuff. But I also feel that in some regards it's still unique to see because of how each Justice League member's personality kind of shifts, but it also stays somewhat the same. John Stewart and the Flash's relationship, there is a brotherhood there that still carries when he dies. Minor spoilers. When you basically kill the Flash, basically John Stewart is kind of pissed. So, and I also think there is a lot of arguments to be said about with the Suicide Squad. They can't kill the Justice League. They can't. I think the arguments are valid, but I also think if there was other members in the squad besides these core four, which are the easiest gameplay wise. Now, if this was in the comics and they had a few extra members, that's where I think that argument would lose traction. I also think that in some regards, I think the wasted potential comes from the story, wasting it on the premise. The premise of Brainiac taking over the Justice League is not completely original, but I honestly, it's never been taken completely seriously because characters like Batman have always derailed that. And large scale villains like Brainiac never really truly succeed, usually. So, for the game's premise, basically truly taking over the Justice League, besides Diana, actually is a pretty cool premise because you don't really see that a whole lot. Brainiac usually fails, but for him to be escalated to a multiverse level villain, basically destroying worlds to make a new planet, actually is something cool because you don't see it a lot. And honestly, for all it's worth, having that happen is pretty cool because you never really see Brainiac truly succeed. Even in the Justice League cartoon, he usually never succeeds. Certain characters always manage to defeat him, whether it's Superman or the Flash or Batman mainly. Or, basically Batman usually has the most prep time. He's basically always been the trump card. So for this game to axe that trump card really leaves no room for error, and it actually makes it a lot better. Where the argument of the Justice League being the bad guys actually makes it more threatening in my eyes. My problems lie with the fact in the storytelling is that they sometimes like characters like Batman does stalk you through the game, but the problem is he doesn't do much. He watches from a distance, and yes, there are maybe 2 boss fights with him that are both great. I do believe the game does fumble in its storytelling. But the past Arkham games are not perfect either in the storytelling front. Every game has its own flaws. Now, do I believe that this game, letting go of the bias of what came before from Rocksteady, people have this expectation that what they want from things. But it's not always about what people want from it. It's about what the developers want as well. And they're making something with heart and partial passion. Now, do I think that game does lack the same amount of flair that the previous games had? Somewhat, yes, slightly. But I also believe with characters like Brainiac being used partially as a plot device, and there being not as much to do with this game. For the record, this game is to kill the Justice League. Most often than not, we're facing against Brainiac's goons. Now, the argument can be made is similar to with Arkham Knight, with Scarecrow's militia, and in Arkham City and Arkham Asylum, similar premise, right? With a similar thing. I can see that argument. But with the Suicide Squad, I do believe they missed the ball in some senses. I think this game has a lot of great elements. I think the problem is it misses on a few senses. Characters like the Flash, Green Lantern, Batman, and a lot of different others do have their time to shine. But I think where it misses in the storytelling front and just misses in a lot of other things. But I do think it does have potential. I think it did have a great plot where you take out the certain elements and you rework a lot of different things. It being the worst case scenario, and it basically being Arkham's version of a what if the Brainiac took over the Justice League, but also this time we're not having Batman be the trump card to save everyone. It basically being all hell breaks loose. And I think that's an amazing idea. And especially with the idea of Brainiac being in this universe. Now, you can say what you will about designs and a lot of different elements, which I could wholeheartedly agree with. But I do think this game has some great potential, but just misses the bar in a lot of senses. Just a lot of things feel very disconnected, and a lot of different story elements could have been reworked or made better to make it have more of that Arkham flair. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. All that jazz really helps me out. And bye-bye.